Hello everyone, this is Damon with PixNub Software, and for this video I'm going to be going over a brand new action that we just released, and that's called Easy Dispersion. What this is meant to do is create this really cool dispersion effect, which I'm sure you've seen before. It's very popular with sports photography, but it's where you have these particles that seem like they're coming right off of the person and typically going in the direction they're coming from. Now, there's literally hundreds of actions you can buy for this online. However, I decided to create my own because none of the actions gave me the look I wanted and didn't provide the flexibility for different sizes of images, as well as not being as automatable as I wanted. So I created an action that, or a set of actions that I actually think is better than anything I've used. But if you look at these particles, you can see these look very natural, like they're coming right from the person. And that's because I actually used the texture right from the person's layer itself in the steps that it uses to create these. And then additionally, there's different sizing options you can see here. So this gives you the option for a different look, as well as the option to use this on different sizes of images. Now, for example, you see these particles here are much too large for this image, but if this image was a much higher resolution image, you would need larger size particles because in relationship to the size of the image, those particles would not be as large. And there is the option for left and for right, which is pretty self-explanatory. It's just the direction you want the particles to come from. And also there's a density option, which you can see there's low density here, high density, which the density is just the amount of particles, and then regular. So you've got three options for different densities. And this is really, really easy to run. Let me find my history state here. Make sure I'm still at 3,000 pixels. Okay, so when you run these, there's just a few things you have to think about before you just select one. Now there's 42 different actions to run here, and so, but don't be overwhelmed because it's actually pretty simple. Additionally, there's sub-actions below. Don't touch the sub-actions. Those are what the main actions use to run, and that's because a lot of these steps get repeated hundreds and hundreds of times within the main actions, so it made sense to create groups of actions that the main actions ran. But these top ones that start with left and right, these are the ones you want to use. And so you have to think first whether you want the particles coming from the left or the right. And the next thing is the density of the particles that you want, and typically regular is generally what you want to start with, and I usually use regular or low most of the time, not the high density as much, but there is that option in case you want more particles. And then the size. Now how I set these sizes is I thought of this with sports photography in mind, that once you've cropped an image with sports photography, typically the athlete takes up most of the frame of the photo and their full body is in the photo. So if you have a photo cropped like that, the image size and height, so image, let's look at the image size, this 3,000 pixels tall, which is the height of this image, if you use the one that's called 3,000 pix, that's going to give you the standard size of particles. So I'm just going to hit play on this. So what it's going to do, it's going to automatically paint in an area for you. And since we chose left, it painted the left side. If we had chosen right, it would paint on the right side. But this is the area where the particles are going to disperse from. And if you're happy with that, you can just hit continue. If you want to change that, you can hit stop, update it, and then hit play to continue your action. But I'm just going to hit continue because I like the way that looks, and generally that'll look pretty good. Alright, that took about 40 seconds or so, I would guess. The time lapse in the video I'm sure was quicker, but it generally takes about 30 seconds to a minute to run, depending on the size of your image that you're using. And so that looks pretty good overall. There's really not much that we would have to do. However, this is well organized and you can make touch-ups if you have to. So with the layer structure, you've got all the particles in subgroups inside a main particle group. And if you want to erase a particle, let's say there's one that you just don't like. Well, the first thing you can do is if you don't like the particle distribution and you want to rerun it, you're going to get a different distribution of particles every time because it's created randomly. But let's just say you have one particle you want to erase because maybe it's covering something in the background you want to not be covered. You just go to this group called particles, click on that, make sure you've got a black brush selected. So the foreground color is the brush color. And then grab a brush and then just brush off the particle. We're working in this particles menu here. I'm going to undo that here. And then show you as well, there is another layer group on the main layer. Now you can paint the effect off here too, but the difference is, I'm just going to start painting some particles off. If you paint in this group, you're also painting off the effect of this motion blur layer below. So generally that's not what you want to do, although there may be times when you need to paint that blur off. But you see anywhere we paint off a particle, we're losing that effect below. So if we paint in this particles layer, you see we're erasing particles, but we're not losing that motion blur. So just let me undo all of that here. And the last thing I guess to discuss on what you can adjust is the motion blur itself. Now this adds a motion blur in the same direction as your particles, and that motion blur is isolated just to the dispersion area. So if I hide everything, we can see that motion blur here. And that's set to 50% by default. You can turn that down to 0 if you want it off, or you can turn it up to 100 if you want it stronger. It's just really up to you what you want to do with it. And also with batch processing, I'll show you how to turn off that stop in the action, so that way if you want to just trust it to make the paint selection where you want, then it can just run in batch. Before we do that though, I'm going to discuss that paint area. Actually, I think I'll use this image here, and I'll show you when that is useful. So if we go back to our action here, I believe this one I used the smaller one. So if we go to image size again, this image is only 1,332 pixels tall. So if I use the 1200 pix action, it'll probably give me about the look that I want. So let's just hit play in this. So now you see in this particular image, since there's two athletes, it made a selection on both athletes, and I don't want particles coming off the athlete in the back because the main focus is on the athlete running the ball here. So I'm going to hit stop at this point, and it already selects the magenta color brush for you. It doesn't select the brush, it sets the foreground color, but you'll have to still go select your brush. If you want to brush, that's if you want to brush areas on. So let's say I wanted to brush areas on here and add a few more particles. Oh, and by the way too, the particle density that we're selecting, regular density, low or high, the only thing that does is selects a wider or more narrow area in the paint. So if you come in here and start painting, you're overriding what the density does, just FYI. Okay, now let's get back on track here. I want to actually discuss the areas to erase. So I painted some areas just to show you you can paint on areas. And then you can also erase areas. So I'm going to make the brush large. Yeah, let's say we don't want particles coming from this person here. We just paint those off. And then once you're happy with where the particles are coming from, I'm actually going to go paint a few more on coming off down here. Let's really make this effect more pronounced down here. All right, I might have overdone it, but we will see. So let's just, once we're ready, we're just going to hit continue here on the action, and that's this play button. But what you want to make sure you don't do is don't select any other step in the action. Now usually it opens the action. Maybe I closed it. In any case, just hit play and it will continue where it left off. But like I say, make sure you don't select any other step in the action if the action is opened up for you, because when you hit play, it's going to continue wherever you have selected in the action. So you want to make sure you're continuing from the step that it left off. All right, pretty cool there. Finished, no problem. Now one thing, I did select this action that was the 1200 pix action, and it didn't give me the larger particles that I had before the last time I ran it, because I think last time I ran on this 2000 pix action. So depending on the look you want, if you wanted those particles a little bit larger and a little bit further away, you could select the next action up. And also, if one action makes them too large and the other makes them smaller than you want, you can resize your image a bit to compensate for that. So for instance, if you wanted the particles a little bit larger than this, you could scale your image down. Or if you went to the 2000 pix action and they were a little bit too large and you wanted them a little bit smaller, you could scale it somewhere in between these. So maybe make your image 1600 or 1700 pixels tall. Anyway, just play around with it, and the size of particles you get is depending on which action you run, in addition to the size of your image. I don't think it looks too bad though, but just to point out, you can alter that if you want. So the last thing I'm going to do is show you how to make this so it runs by itself without stopping for you to paint. And so let's make sure I do the right one here. 25. Actually, not sure if I ran the 2000 or the 3000 pix one here. I think I ran the 2000 pix action on this one. So let's do that action here. So this stop step, if you uncheck this, it's not going to stop for you to paint. Now, if you just uncheck this show dialog checkbox, it will still stop, but it just won't bring you the pop-up menu giving you the option to continue. So you'll have to hit the play button. So I'm just going to uncheck the stop step itself and then start over and just show you that it's going to just completely bypass that. So it's already past that step. I could see in the layers that it did it. Now it's on to building it. Now this is what you'd want to do if you were to batch process this action on a whole folder of images. Because if you've only got a single person, it usually does a pretty good job anyway, and generally you don't need to paint anything. So if you just undo your stop step, you could batch process this on a whole folder of images. Alright, the effect is finished. And it looks like I did get the same size that I got last time, so it was the 2000 pix action that I had ran before. But pretty cool. I mean, a really, really cool effect that is very simple to apply without having to really do a whole lot. It's just basically select the action you want, hit play. If it's not the exact size you want, select a different one and play it again, or resize your image and play it again to get the size you want. Anyway, thanks for watching, and if you're interested in this dispersion action, please be sure to check that out on our website, and that is pixnub.com.